Hello, welcome to The Moment. This time it's going to be a very Newcastle-centric episode as I look at the installation of a strange new structure by St Thomas's Church, and I'll also be talking about new plans for the Blue House Roundabout in Gosforth. So let's turn to the first story. Air pollution is becoming an increasing problem. In 2014, the World Health Organization estimated that around 7 million people had died in 2012 as a result of exposure to air pollution. This has led to many companies over the last several years trying to find ways to improve the air quality, particularly in urban areas where there's the biggest problem. And last Thursday's installation of what's called a city tree at Newcastle's Haymarket is the latest example. The press release on Newcastle City Council's website says, quote, Northumbrian Water Group has been working on the plan since July 2017, when it held its first ever NWG Innovation Festival, working with a range of partners to identify ways it can tackle a wide range of social and environmental problems. The company reached an agreement with Newcastle City Council to site the tree at Haymarket, close to the city's busy bus interchange and main roads. Now, the idea behind the moss walls is to tackle air pollution, and the design, which looks like a freestanding metal sculpture with greenery either side and benches beneath, has already been seen in Glasgow as of last year. The World Economic Forum talks about them in greater detail, saying, quote, Created by startup Green City Solutions, the freestanding vertical units are covered in moss and lichens, which have a massive surface area to absorb particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide and ozone. The tree's investors estimate that a single structure has the environmental benefits of 227 urban trees, but taking up 99% less space and at just 5% of the cost. Growing on units 4 meters high and 3 meters deep, city trees are powered by solar panels and collect rainwater in troughs. They also require little maintenance. Via the internet, things like soil humidity, nutrient levels, and general plant health are monitored and adjusted accordingly. The carbon footprint of producing a city tree is 4 tons, which is more than offset in the space of a year. The manufacturer estimates each unit will capture 240 tons of carbon dioxide annually. So far, the product has been rolled out in several cities in countries such as Norway, France, Germany, Belgium, Macedonia, and Hong Kong. Although each tree costs around $25,000, the cost can be mitigated by the potential for advertising on the trees via screens on the unit. An article on CNN talks about one of the co-founders of Green City Solutions, Zhengliang Wu, saying, while studying at Dresden University of Technology, Wu met Victor Splitgerber, a mechanical engineer, and Denise Honus, an architect. After graduating, they ran a workshop at the university on sustainable urban design, focusing on new ways to tackle environmental problems in cities. The trio then met Peter Sanger, a graduate in production management for horticulture, and this led them to coming up with the idea for City Tree. However, the article then goes on to talk about the big problem with their idea, and they quote Gary Fuller, who's an expert on air pollution at King's College London, and he thinks the concept of an urban air purifier might be too ambitious. He says, quote, even if you had a perfect air cleaner, getting the ambient air in contact with it is really hard. Pollution from a car exhaust, for example, gets dispersed vertically a few kilometers into the air. But the city tree investors say, quote, we intentionally pick spots where pollution is heavy due to traffic and airflow is limited. We are also testing a ventilation system to create our own airflow to get the pollution to the tree. Our ultimate goal is to incorporate the technology into existing buildings. And really this is the biggest problem, knowing just how much of a difference the city tree will have over time. But it's almost being run sort of as an experiment in the public domain, as the results that will be collected from the tree in Newcastle in particular, and probably on the other trees as well, will be shared with schools and universities, which will lead to a better understanding of the usefulness of such installations in the future. Now let's turn to the final story. A new recommendation has been put forward to Newcastle Council for development of the Blue House Roundabout in Gosforth, just outside of the city centre. The story on the Chronicle says, quote, Newcastle Council first explored major changes to the accident black spot in Gosforth in 2016, but the original scheme, which included a mega roundabout built on the town moor, came under heavy criticism. The plans were finally abandoned after 2,000 people attended a protest rally and tied ribbons to trees which faced being chopped down. Now, recommendations from the Blue House Working Group have been presented to around 200 Gosforth and Jesmond residents at a public meeting. So let's take a look at that recommendation document on the Blue House Working Group's website. It says, the case for change at Blue House is based on considerations of the 5 key issues: the need to resolve a known safety problem, to improve conditions for walking, making it a more attractive option for local trips, to improve conditions for cycling, to improve the attractiveness of bus travel as an alternative to cars, and to address the consequences of the predicted growth in car travel through the junction. They go on to say that some of these areas fit with the Council's intended policies of making Newcastle more accessible, achieving a shift towards more sustainable modes of travel, reduced carbon emissions, enhancing the transport network, and improving its efficiency. The recommendation focuses on the policy of promoting sustainable travel, saying, quote, in order to fulfill this key policy, action to enable more walking, cycling and bus travel is needed now. By contrast, action to address the consequences of growth in car travel, specifically in relation to the predicted future congestion, is not needed urgently. Indeed, it may not be needed at all. Total traffic flows through the Blue House Junction were around 10% lower in 2016 than in 2008. The 2016 proposal for Blue House was based on predicted traffic growth of 20% by 2031 compared with 2016. This prediction was based on central traffic forecasts from the Department for Transport, but based on the historical inaccuracy of comparable forecasts, there are reasonable doubts about the reliability of such predictions. Further uncertainty about the growth in car travel arises from the emergence of new forms of transport, i.e. shared, autonomous and connected vehicles, and the trend towards people consuming mobility as a service and relying less on personal vehicles. Moreover, the Council has an opportunity to influence future traffic growth by investing in the alternatives, namely walking, cycling and public transport. So this is the reason that the Blue House Working Group believe that the previously planned mega roundabout wouldn't be necessary, and why a smaller roundabout will be just fine. They recommend that, quote, the City Council takes forward work to remodel the roundabout, implement new paths and crossings to facilitate safer and more convenient walking and cycling, and extend bus lanes on the Great North Road to increase bus priority. And I'll put a link to the document in the description so you can see what the plans themselves actually look like. But they go on to say, quote, should an increase in traffic capacity be considered necessary, this should take the form of expanding the existing roundabout by using the land where the Blue House itself currently sits, so as to minimise the loss of trees and other moorland. Now, this in itself has led to concerns, as the Blue House is an historic building and a landmark in Newcastle. A page on the website Sightlines talks about the Blue House, which was built in the early 1850s. It says, quote, there were 2 workers' cottages built on the town moor by the Stewards Committee to house the workers and their families who were employed by the freemen for the various jobs involved with the upkeep of the moor. These became known as the Blue Houses due to the regulation colour of their paintwork. Now, the Blue House Group aren't saying that the house will be demolished, just that it's a possibility if the traffic growth continues, and they're not sure that it will. But of course it's understandable that this is something that needs to be kept under scrutiny in case they do decide to demolish the building in the future. In fact, they say in the final paragraphs, quote, insofar as the recommendations seek to achieve the working group's wish to minimise the loss of trees and moorland, and to avoid the loss of the Blue House building if possible, it's clear that this will require future traffic growth to be substantially lower than predicted. The role of the working group members in obtaining the support of the people is likely to be crucial in limiting future traffic growth and preserving the Blue House building, and protecting the trees and moorland. So there they very much put the ball in the people of Newcastle's court, in that it's up to them how successful these plans end up being, and the Blue House's future very much depends on them. I'm not sure that holding the building to ransom is essentially a good strategy, but we'll have to see where this proposal goes, assuming it's approved. And that's all for this episode. Be sure to join me in a fortnight's time for more from around Northumberland and Newcastle. Until then, I'm Oliver Ralph, and this is The Moment.